Wow. Okay, so let's take it back to the basics. What is learning? Can you describe what learning is? And also, the other question that I had in addition, how does it differ from other species, our ability to learn? How does it differ from other species and perhaps other primates as well, if there's any significant difference?
There's gradual differences. Let's take a planarium, which is this little tiny round worm. Planariums can learn. You poke them and they'll learn to kind of stay away from certain areas. They can learn things. And actually, there's a wonderful book called, I think it's called The Evolution of Intelligence. It talks about how learning evolved and became more complex as the critters developed. So you have an oyster, and then you've got coral, can't learn very well. It's kind of stuck. But as animals became bilateral and they developed with two, like a left and a right side, they began to be able to learn more effectively in all sorts of different ways. Like you can learn that, like a fish can learn that if a light flashes, that 5 seconds later, the fish will get a poke if it does not move to the other side of the aquarium. So you know what those fish will do? They will sit there, the light flashes, and they'll just like leisurely, like just kind of swim around. And then like at 4.8 seconds, right before they'll get poked, they'll go over to the other side of the aquarium. They're really quite clever. And that's a fish. So how do humans learn? Of course, we learn a lot, in much more complex ways. But the ultimate thing that we're doing is when we learn something, we are making connections between neurons in long-term memory in the neocortex. So that pattern, that clump of connected neurons is activated when we are accessing that memory. Now, unfortunately, educators and psychologists have said, they're well-meaning, but they're like, you don't need to remember things. You can always just look things up. But that
Hmm.
means you don't form engrams of memory within you. And you can do really, you know, if I can't speak Spanish, if I'm always just going and looking it up on Google Translate. I can't speak the language of numbers if I'm always just going and looking it up on Google Translate. You have to have those links formed. It's an architecture within you that is formed when you are learning something.
You know, it's very interesting when you say that because we don't just have normal search engines today. We have AI powered search engines. And so sometimes I try to explain, and I think it touches based on what you're saying here, but sometimes I try to explain there's a difference in between if I'm carrying out a research project, me going and finding the research information, the papers and articles, reading through them, narrow down the information, take the information, put it on a different sheet and start creating a clean draft versus let's say, hey, Chad, can you give me all the research and papers that Dr. Barbara Oakley has written throughout her career? I always felt like there's a lot in the process that is missed. So at school, they're trying to urge kids to find different ways of using AI, but they still try to get them to go through all of these steps because they matter. We're building small little blocks of information that we're gathering that by the time that you're writing the essay, you've got a lot of points that you can refer to. You've got a lot of information that you've read through. And I used to even notice that back when I was younger doing presentation in front of classes where by the time I get to that presentation, I can talk endlessly because I've been reading for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks plus about this specific subject. And although not all the information made it, but a lot of it is still present in my brain and can help me make inferences and whatnot. And so, how do you see current technological trend affect how we learn because we don't just have calculators anymore. We have chat can write entire medical papers.